If your child, teen, young adult, spouse, or even you are struggling with ADHD, OCD, anxiety, low motivation, emotional dysregulation, nausea, constipation, poor sleep, gaming all night, THC use, alcohol use, stimulant medication crashes, or that terrifying feeling of, I just don't feel like myself, we have to stop pretending the brain is separate from the body. The brain is not floating around in a glass jar making decisions by itself. The brain is attached to a liver, a gut, hormones, blood sugar, how iron stores, vitamin D levels, thyroid function, sleep rhythms, hydration status, and a nervous system that can only regulate if the body has enough fuel to regulate. When families say, he is lazy, she is dramatic, he has no motivation, or she is so anxious for no reason, I want us to pause and ask a much better question. What is happening underneath the behavior? Welcome back to the Path to Peace Therapy podcast. I'm Stephanie Buckley, a parenting strategist and family systems coach specializing in ADHD, executive functioning, emotional regulation, anxiety, OCD, and the patterns that keep families stuck. I created this podcast because so many parents are trying to understand behavior without being given the full map. A child's behavior, a teenager's shutdown, a young adult's avoidance, or a spouse's emotional reactivity is almost always connected to a larger system. That system includes sleep, food, screens, substances, hormones, family roles, nervous system regulation, and biology. Today, we are going to talk about the blood panels and body systems that can quietly affect ADHD, OCD, anxiety, mood, motivation, appetite, constipation, nausea, and emotional regulation. When we are trying to understand why someone with ADHD, OCD, anxiety, emotional dysregulation, low motivation, nausea, poor appetite, constipation, social withdrawal, gaming, THC use, emotional shutdown, or difficulty launching into adulthood is struggling, we have to stop thinking about the brain and body as separate systems. One of the greatest mistakes both families and even professionals sometimes make is looking at one isolated piece of the puzzle and assuming that piece alone explains the problem. The reality is that the brain is not floating independently somewhere in the body, making decisions on its own. The brain is in constant communication with hormones, blood sugar, sleep, gut health, inflammation, sunlight exposure, dopamine, cortisol, nutrition, movement, the liver, thyroid, and the nervous system itself. When several of these systems quietly begin moving in the wrong direction at the same time, a person can start looking dramatically different emotionally, cognitively, and behaviorally. Families may begin describing the person as lazy, oppositional, immature, disrespectful, dramatic, anxious, avoidant, unmotivated, or even depressed, when underneath the surface there may be a nervous system that has gradually become biologically overwhelmed. This is especially important in people with ADHD, OCD, or anxiety because neurodivergent nervous systems tend to have less margin for physiological disruption. A neurotypical person may tolerate poor sleep, skipped meals, little sunlight, nutrient depletion, inconsistent routines, blood sugar swings, and limited movement with mild consequences. Someone with ADHD or OCD often feels those disruptions much more intensely because the brain is already working harder to regulate focus, motivation, emotional regulation, distress tolerance, and executive functioning. Executive functioning refers to the brain's management system, including planning, organization, task initiation, working memory, prioritization, emotional regulation, and follow-through. Think of executive functioning like the CEO of the brain. When that CEO is under stress, underfed, sleep-deprived, inflamed, hormonally dysregulated, or operating with low dopamine, even small responsibilities can begin to feel neurologically enormous. This is why it becomes so important to understand what the body is doing biologically. Let us imagine, for example, a 24-year-old male with ADHD. He games late into the night, often staying up until 2 or 3 in the morning. He rarely sees sunlight because he sleeps through much of the morning and early afternoon. His stimulant medication suppresses his appetite, so he skips breakfast and eats minimally throughout the day. He drinks caffeine because he feels exhausted, occasionally uses THC because it slows his mind down and helps him escape anxiety, and he has slowly become more withdrawn from responsibilities, exercise, family, and friends. His mother says he has no motivation. His father says, "At his age, I was already working." His siblings wonder why he seems stuck. Yet, underneath the surface, there may be a completely different story unfolding biologically. He may have low vitamin D because he rarely gets sunlight. He may have low ferritin, meaning his stored iron is depleted, which affects oxygen delivery and dopamine production. His stimulant medication may suppress appetite enough that he is unintentionally under-eating protein, destabilizing blood sugar and neurotransmitter production. THC may temporarily calm his nervous system while also reinforcing avoidance and reducing motivation over time. Poor sleep may be disrupting cortisol, testosterone, dopamine timing, and circadian rhythm. Constipation may be affecting gut health, inflammation, serotonin production, and physical comfort. What families are seeing externally as laziness may actually be an overwhelmed biological system struggling to regulate itself. This becomes especially important when we talk about dopamine, because dopamine sits at the center of so much of what people misunderstand about ADHD. Dopamine is one of the neurotransmitters heavily involved in motivation, pleasure, anticipation, novelty, reward, task initiation, and persistence. Many people assume motivation comes first and action comes second. In reality, for many people with ADHD, activation must come first before motivation arrives. This is why someone with ADHD may desperately want to clean their room, finish homework, apply for jobs, or respond to emails, and still feel completely unable to begin. The nervous system may interpret ordinary tasks as overwhelming because the dopamine reward is too delayed. Video games, scrolling, social media, THC, junk food, nicotine, or highly stimulating environments begin feeling neurologically easier because they provide immediate reward. This is not simply a willpower issue. It is an issue of how the reward system is functioning. However, gaming is not the whole story. Gaming often becomes the visible symptom of a much larger ecosystem problem. The deeper question becomes, what is gaming replacing? In many young adults, excessive gaming gradually replaces sunlight, movement, exercise, socializing, risk-taking, emotional discomfort tolerance, structure, sleep consistency, and real-world mastery. This process can happen slowly enough that families often do not recognize it until life has already become significantly narrowed. A young person who once played sports, spent time outside, and tolerated ordinary discomfort may gradually spend more time in their room, less time with friends, less time moving, and less time engaging with the world. This process is called behavioral narrowing, meaning the nervous system slowly organizes itself around what feels safest, most predictable, and least emotionally demanding. Behavioral narrowing becomes important because avoidance works in the short term. If school feels overwhelming, staying home lowers anxiety. If social situations feel uncomfortable, gaming feels easier. If applying for jobs triggers shame, avoidance temporarily reduces distress. If responsibilities feel overwhelming, scrolling, sleeping, or THC may provide immediate relief. The nervous system learns something very quickly. Avoidance works. This process is called negative The problem is that short-term relief often creates long-term suffering. The less someone practices tolerating discomfort, uncertainty, boredom, or emotional vulnerability, the harder those experiences begin to feel. Over time, the room begins feeling safer than the world. This becomes even more significant when sunlight and vitamin D are removed from the equation. Vitamin D is commonly misunderstood as just a vitamin, but biologically it behaves much more like a hormone regulator and messenger system. Vitamin D influences dopamine, serotonin, immune functioning, inflammation, estrogen, testosterone, mood regulation, sleep, emotional resilience, and nervous system flexibility. When someone spends most of their life indoors gaming, scrolling, or isolating, especially while sleeping during daylight hours, vitamin D often quietly declines. The consequences are frequently mistaken for laziness or depression. In males with ADHD, low vitamin D may show up as emotional flatness, irritability, low motivation, fatigue, low frustration tolerance, emotional withdrawal, avoidance, or apathy. Parents often say, "He just doesn't care." But often underneath that presentation is a nervous system running with less fuel. Testosterone may begin declining, dopamine signaling may weaken, inflammation may rise, and the person may feel increasingly dependent on fast dopamine sources because ordinary life no longer feels rewarding enough. Gaming becomes one of the few places where mastery still exists. Inside the game, he knows the rules. He can succeed. He can level up. He can escape shame. Because shame quietly becomes part of the story. Shame is different than guilt. Guilt says, "I made a mistake." Shame says, "I am the mistake." Many young adults quietly wonder, why can't I get it together? Why does everything feel harder for me? What is wrong with me? Yet they rarely say those thoughts out loud. Women often present differently. A female with ADHD, anxiety, or OCD may continue functioning externally while privately feeling exhausted and overwhelmed. She may still go to work, care for children, maintain friendships, and appear productive while internally feeling emotionally flooded, overstimulated, nauseous, anxious, forgetful, and depleted. Women tend to internalize distress, meaning emotional pain turns inward instead of outward. Rather than looking oppositional, she may become anxious, perfectionistic, self-critical, emotionally exhausted, or highly sensitive to criticism. Hormonal fluctuations may intensify symptoms because estrogen significantly affects dopamine. During certain phases of the menstrual cycle, women often notice worsening ADHD symptoms, increased OCD rumination, panic, intrusive thoughts, irritability, or emotional overwhelm. This is not weakness. This is neurobiology interacting with hormones. Ferritin and iron become critically important here as well because iron is necessary for dopamine production. Ferritin measures stored iron, essentially the body's reserve tank. Someone may technically not be anemic yet still have low ferritin, meaning the nervous system is already undersupported. A male with low ferritin may look unmotivated, irritable, checked out, restless, or increasingly drawn toward quick dopamine activities. A female may feel emotionally flooded, exhausted, cold, anxious, dizzy, overstimulated, and increasingly unable to tolerate daily demands. Low ferritin often worsens both ADHD and OCD symptoms because dopamine regulation becomes harder and distress tolerance decreases. The thyroid also matters enormously because thyroid dysfunction can masquerade as psychiatric symptoms. Someone with low thyroid may present with fatigue, constipation, nausea, depression, low motivation, brain fog, slowed thinking, emotional flatness, and low frustration tolerance. Hyperthyroidism, on the other hand, may look like anxiety, panic, racing thoughts, insomnia, irritability, nausea, and emotional intensity. Families often assume the issue is entirely emotional, when part of the problem may be endocrine. Gut health quietly influences this system as well. Many people do not realize that much of serotonin production occurs in the gut, and constipation itself can contribute to nausea, discomfort, inflammation, appetite changes, irritability, and emotional dysregulation. A person who only has bowel movements once a week may feel physically uncomfortable much of the time without fully recognizing how much that discomfort is affecting mood, patience, concentration, and motivation. Add stimulant medication suppressing appetite, low hydration, poor nutrition, processed food, THC, or low movement, and the gut becomes even more dysregulated. And then we have sleep, which may be one of the biggest hidden variables of all. Poor sleep affects dopamine, cortisol, testosterone, estrogen, blood sugar, executive functioning, emotional regulation, motivation, memory, frustration tolerance, OCD symptoms, anxiety, and resilience. A person sleeping at 3 in the morning and waking at noon may feel physiologically out of sync with life itself. Circadian rhythm, the body's internal clock, becomes delayed. Morning sunlight disappears, energy crashes, motivation drops, sleep quality worsens further. The cycle reinforces itself. When all of these systems begin stacking together low vitamin D, poor sleep, blood sugar instability, low protein intake, THC, stimulant appetite suppression, low ferritin, limited movement, gut dysfunction, hormonal changes, executive dysfunction, and avoidance, the person often begins looking profoundly different. Families frequently interpret this as laziness, immaturity, disrespect, lack of discipline, or lack of ambition. But many times, what they are actually witnessing is a nervous system that has gradually become under-supported, overtaxed, underfueled, overstimulated in some lanes, understimulated in others, and biologically dysregulated. Understanding that distinction does not remove responsibility, but it changes the intervention. Because you cannot shame a dysregulated nervous system into functioning. You have to rebuild the ecosystem that helps it function again. A CBC, or complete blood count, is one of the first panels I want families to understand because it gives us information about red blood cells, white blood cells, hemoglobin, hematocrit, and platelets. In plain English, this panel helps us understand whether the body is carrying oxygen well, whether the immune system appears activated, whether there may be anemia, and whether the body has the basic blood support needed for energy and brain function. Red blood cells carry oxygen throughout the body, and hemoglobin is the protein inside red blood cells that helps transport that oxygen. If oxygen delivery is low, the brain may not simply feel tired. It may feel foggy, irritable, anxious, unmotivated, and overwhelmed. A male with ADHD and low oxygen carrying capacity may look like he is avoiding responsibility, gaming more, sleeping more, or saying, "I'll do it later," when underneath the surface, his brain does not have enough biological stamina to initiate and complete tasks. A female with ADHD, OCD, or anxiety may look more tearful, overstimulated, dizzy, panicky, forgetful, or emotionally flooded, especially if she is also having heavy periods or not eating enough. This is why we have to be careful not to call everything laziness or attitude when sometimes the body is waving a very real biological flag. Ferritin and the full iron panel matter tremendously because iron is not just about anemia. Iron is deeply involved in oxygen transport, energy production, thyroid function, and dopamine. Ferritin measures stored iron, almost like the body's iron savings account. A person can have a normal hemoglobin level and still have low ferritin, which means they may not be technically anemic yet, but their reserve tank is low. This matters for ADHD because dopamine is one of the key neurotransmitters involved in motivation, reward, focus, initiation, and follow-through. If dopamine is already difficult to regulate and then iron stores are low, the person may feel even more stuck, foggy, restless, or emotionally reactive. A young male with ADHD and low ferritin may look apathetic, irritable, avoidant, or addicted to quick dopamine sources such as gaming, THC, nicotine, junk food, scrolling, or anything that gives immediate reward. A female with low ferritin may experience fatigue, hair shedding, dizziness, anxiety, restless legs, poor sleep, emotional sensitivity, and worsening OCD thoughts around her cycle. This is not about excusing behavior. It is about understanding that the nervous system cannot perform well when the body is depleted. The CMP, or Comprehensive Metabolic Panel, gives another layer of the story because it looks at blood sugar, electrolytes, kidney function, liver enzymes, protein levels, and other metabolic markers. Blood sugar is one of the most important pieces for ADHD, OCD, and anxiety because the brain depends on stable glucose for energy. When someone skips breakfast, takes stimulant medication, drinks caffeine, forgets to eat, and then crashes in the afternoon, the family may see irritability, shutdown, rage, panic, or avoidance. A male may externalize that crash by snapping, gaming, withdrawing, or refusing to engage. A female may internalize it by crying, spiraling, feeling shaky, craving sugar, or thinking something is wrong with her. Blood sugar instability can mimic anxiety because the body may feel shaky, nauseous, sweaty, weak, or panicky, and then the anxious brain interprets those sensations as danger. This is why protein before carbohydrates can make such a difference for many neurodivergent people. Protein provides amino acids, which are building blocks for neurotransmitters, and it helps stabilize blood sugar so the brain has a steadier supply of fuel. The liver deserves a much deeper conversation because the liver is one of the most overlooked organs in mental health. The liver processes alcohol, medications, hormones, toxins, blood sugar storage, bile production, and inflammatory byproducts. It helps metabolize estrogen, testosterone, cortisol, thyroid hormones, ADHD medications, SSRIs, THC, alcohol, and many supplements. The liver is not just a filter, it is a chemical processing plant. When the liver is under strain from alcohol, fatty liver, poor diet, inflammation, medications, supplements, or heavy THC use, people may experience fatigue, nausea, poor appetite, hormone disruption, brain fog, irritability, sleep issues, and emotional dysregulation. Liver enzymes such as AST and ALT can sometimes show whether the liver is irritated or inflamed, though results must always be interpreted by a medical provider in context. Alcohol is especially important because the liver prioritizes metabolizing alcohol, and that can disrupt blood sugar, sleep, hormone clearance, inflammation, and nervous system regulation. The National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism explains that alcohol is primarily broken down through liver enzyme pathways, and the liver is central to alcohol metabolism. For females, liver function matters because estrogen has to be processed and cleared. When estrogen is not metabolized efficiently, or when progesterone is low relative to estrogen, women may experience PMS, PMDD-like symptoms, breast tenderness, irritability, rage, anxiety, worsening, OCD, nausea, bloating, and emotional flooding. Estrogen also affects dopamine, which is why many women with ADHD notice that their focus, motivation, and emotional regulation change across the menstrual cycle. They may feel capable one week and completely dysregulated the next, not because she is inconsistent or dramatic, but because her hormones are changing the dopamine environment in her brain. For men, liver function matters because testosterone balance, estrogen conversion, alcohol metabolism, inflammation, and metabolic health all interact. A male who drinks heavily, sleeps poorly, eats poorly, uses THC, and rarely exercises may experience low drive, low motivation, erectile dysfunction, irritability, belly fat, fatigue, and emotional flatness. Families may call it depression or laziness, but the physiology may be part of the picture. Vitamin D is another major piece because vitamin D behaves more like a hormone-like regulator than just a simple vitamin. It supports calcium absorption and bone health, but it also has roles in immune function, inflammation regulation, neuromuscular function, and glucose metabolism. The NIH Office of Dietary Supplements notes that vitamin D is involved in reducing inflammation and modulating immune and neuromuscular function, among other roles. For a teen or young adult who sits inside all day, games late into the night, sleeps through morning sunlight, rarely moves, eats poorly, and avoids the outside world, vitamin D can quietly decline. In a male with ADHD, low vitamin D may show up as low energy, low motivation, irritability, emotional flatness, and more reliance on fast dopamine. In a female with ADHD, OCD, or anxiety, it may show up as fatigue, depression, anxiety, emotional sensitivity, worsening PMS, intrusive thoughts, feeling louder, and less resilience to daily stress. The issue is not that gaming alone causes all of this. The issue is what the indoor lifestyle can replace: sunlight, movement, circadian rhythm, social contact, exercise, mastery, and real-world confidence. B12 is another lab families should understand because B12 supports red blood cell formation, DNA production, nerve health, and central nervous system function. The NIH states that vitamin B12 is required for central nervous system development and function, myelination, healthy red blood cell formation, and DNA synthesis. Myelination refers to the protective coating around nerves that helps messages travel efficiently through the nervous system. If B12 is low, a person may feel brain fog, fatigue, tingling, numbness, anxiety, depression, memory problems, poor focus, and emotional sensitivity. A male with ADHD and low B12 may seem checked out, forgetful, unmotivated, or unable to follow multi-step directions. A female may feel like her brain is glitching, forgetting words, losing focus, crying more easily, or becoming overwhelmed by normal responsibilities. With OCD, low B12 may reduce cognitive flexibility, meaning the brain may struggle more to shift away from intrusive thoughts, mental reviewing, reassurance seeking, or compulsive checking. The thyroid panel is essential because thyroid dysfunction can masquerade as anxiety, depression, ADHD, panic, fatigue, constipation, and mood instability. The thyroid is like the body's metabolic thermostat. If thyroid function is low, the body slows down. A person may feel tired, cold, constipated, depressed, foggy, unmotivated, and emotionally flat. A male with low thyroid may look disengaged, low energy, low libido, and irritable. A female may experience weight changes, constipation, hair shedding, heavy periods, depression, anxiety, and worsening brain fog. If thyroid function is too high, the opposite can happen. They may experience panic, racing thoughts, insomnia, irritability, weight loss, nausea, and a racing heart. Families may assume the person has bad anxiety when the thyroid may be contributing. Fasting insulin and A1C help us understand blood sugar regulation over time. A 1C gives a picture of average blood sugar over roughly 3 months, while fasting insulin can show how hard the body is working to manage glucose. Someone can have normal glucose and still have insulin resistance developing underneath the surface. This matters because insulin resistance can contribute to fatigue, sugar cravings, inflammation, brain fog, irritability, and mood instability. For someone with ADHD, blood sugar instability can worsen impulsivity, frustration tolerance, task initiation, and emotional regulation. A young man may look like he has no discipline when his brain is constantly chasing fast fuel. A woman may feel anxious, tired, bloated, foggy, and emotionally fragile, especially if hormone shifts are also in the mix. Inflammation markers such as CRP and ESR can give clues about whether the body is dealing with systemic inflammation. Inflammation matters because the immune system and brain communicate constantly. When the immune system is activated, the brain may experience fatigue, fog, low motivation, irritability, depression, and anxiety. In a person with OCD, inflammation may lower distress tolerance, making intrusive thoughts feel more urgent and sticky. In ADHD, inflammation may worsen regulation, focus, and energy. This does not mean inflammation is the cause of every psychiatric symptom, but it means we cannot pretend the immune system is irrelevant. Gut health and constipation also belong in this discussion because the gut and brain are in constant communication through the gut-brain axis. The gut helps produce and regulate neurotransmitter-related activity, influences inflammation, affects appetite, and communicates with the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is a major communication pathway between the brain and body, helping regulate parasympathetic calming, digestion, heart rate, and the body's ability to shift out of threat mode. If someone is constipated and only having a bowel movement once a week, that is not a small detail. Constipation can contribute to nausea, poor appetite, bloating, irritability, discomfort, and a general feeling of being physically off. Now combine constipation with stimulant medication, dehydration, low fiber, low movement, THC, poor sleep, and anxiety. And suddenly, the whole system can become dysregulated. THC complicates the picture because many people with ADHD, OCD, and anxiety use THC to self-medicate. They may say it helps them calm down, sleep, eat, or slow their racing thoughts. In the short term, that may feel true, but chronic or heavy use can also contribute to avoidance, low motivation, memory issues, emotional blunting, sleep disruption, nausea in some users, anxiety rebound, and worsening executive dysfunction. A male with ADHD may use THC at night to calm down, but over time he may become more avoidant, more apathetic, and more dependent on artificial regulation. A female with anxiety or OCD may initially feel relief, but later experience panic, depersonalization, intrusive thoughts, or emotional sensitivity. Again, this is not about shame. Shame shuts people down. This is about understanding the system. ADHD medication also has to be understood inside the ecosystem. Stimulants can be extremely helpful for attention, impulse control, and executive functioning, but they can also suppress appetite, disrupt sleep if timing is off, increase anxiety in some people, and contribute to dehydration or constipation if the person is not eating and drinking properly. If someone takes stimulant medication but skips breakfast, drinks caffeine, does not eat protein, sleeps poorly, uses THC at night, and has low vitamin D or low ferritin, the medication may feel inconsistent. Families may say the medication stopped working when really the body is undersupported. Medication is not magic. It works best when the biological ecosystem is not completely depleted. This is where the family system's piece matters. When a parent sees a young adult lying in bed, gaming, avoiding work, sleeping late, skipping meals, and reacting with irritability, the parent's nervous system often moves into fear. Fear turns into lectures, criticism, reminders, threats, and emotional escalation. The young adult then feels shame, defensiveness, and overwhelm. This creates a loop. The parent overfunctions by managing, reminding, rescuing, and pushing. The young adult underfunctions by avoiding, withdrawing, and becoming more dependent. Overfunctioning means one person takes on too much responsibility for another person's life, often out of love and fear. Underfunctioning means the other person gradually does less and becomes less capable because the system has made it easier to avoid responsibility than to build capacity. The goal is not to blame either person. The goal is to change the system. A better approach is to rebuild the ecosystem step by step. It means we start asking better questions. Has your child or loved one had a CBC, ferritin, iron panel, CMP, thyroid panel, vitamin D, B12, fasting insulin, A1C, hormone panel, and inflammation markers checked by a medical provider? Are they eating protein before carbohydrates? Are they drinking water? Are they getting morning sunlight? Are they moving their body? Are they sleeping at a consistent time? Are they using THC, alcohol, nicotine, or caffeine in ways that are altering the nervous system? Are they constipated? Are they nauseous? Are they eating enough? Are they socially withdrawing because of anxiety, shame, depression, OCD, or executive dysfunction? One of the most overlooked pieces of this conversation is food, because food is not simply fuel. Food is information for the brain. Every single thing we eat either supports neurotransmitter production, hormone regulation, blood sugar stability, gut health, inflammation reduction, and nervous system resilience, or it quietly works against those systems. This becomes especially important for people with ADHD, OCD, anxiety, emotional dysregulation, and executive functioning struggles, because neurodivergent brains are often much more sensitive to blood sugar swings, inflammation, food additives, sleep disruption, and nutrient depletion. A neurotypical nervous system may tolerate a day of processed food, caffeine, sugary snacks, skipped meals, and poor hydration with moderate consequences. A neurodivergent nervous system often feels those consequences much more intensely. The person may suddenly appear irritable, emotionally flooded, anxious, impulsive, unmotivated, foggy, or overwhelmed, and families may assume it is behavioral when biology may be contributing significantly. One of the first things I encourage families to think about is protein before carbohydrates, especially in the morning. Protein provides amino acids, which are the building blocks for neurotransmitters, like dopamine and serotonin. Dopamine is deeply involved in focus, motivation, initiation, follow-through, and emotional regulation, while serotonin influences mood, flexibility, calmness, and distress tolerance. When someone with ADHD wakes up and immediately consumes sugary cereal, pastries, energy drinks, sweet coffee drinks, or skips breakfast altogether, blood sugar tends to spike and crash quickly. That crash often looks like irritability, poor focus, emotional reactivity, overwhelm, anxiety, cravings, or shutdown. A teenager may leave the house after eating almost nothing, take stimulant medication, suppress appetite all day, and then crash emotionally in the afternoon or binge eat late at night. Parents often say, "He is impossible by dinner time," or "She falls apart after school." But sometimes the nervous system is simply depleted. Instead of highly processed breakfast foods, I often encourage families to think about building meals around protein, fiber, healthy fats, and complex carbohydrates. Protein sources might include eggs, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, turkey sausage, chicken, salmon, lean beef, protein smoothies, chia pudding, or high-quality protein drinks if someone struggles with appetite. Fiber helps regulate digestion and blood sugar while supporting gut health. Healthy fats, such as avocado, olive oil, nuts, seeds, and omega-3 rich fish, help support the brain because the brain itself is largely made of fat and requires healthy fats for communication between neurons. Complex carbohydrates, such as berries, sweet potatoes, oats, quinoa, brown rice, beans, apples, or vegetables, provide steadier energy compared to highly processed foods that spike glucose and then crash the nervous system. We also need to talk honestly about ultra-processed foods, food dyes, and additives, because some neurodivergent individuals appear particularly sensitive to them. While every person responds differently, many parents report seeing worsening emotional dysregulation, impulsivity, hyperactivity, irritability or difficulty focusing after heavy intake of artificial dyes, highly processed snacks, sugary drinks, or fast food. Food dyes such as red 40, yellow 5, and blue 1 are often discussed in ADHD communities because some children and adults appear more behaviorally sensitive to them. This does not mean one cupcake suddenly causes ADHD, but for a nervous system already struggling to regulate attention, emotion, or sensory input, additional inflammatory or stimulating factors may matter. Gut health also belongs in this conversation because the gut and brain are constantly communicating. The gut-brain axis refers to the communication pathway between digestion, inflammation, neurotransmitter production, and emotional regulation. If someone is constipated, bloated, eating poorly, skipping meals, living on processed foods, or relying heavily on caffeine, THC, or sugar, the gut may become dysregulated. Many people do not realize how much constipation, bloating, nausea, or poor digestion can affect patients' emotional regulation, appetite, anxiety, and motivation. A young adult who only has bowel movements once a week may not realize how physically uncomfortable they feel because the discomfort has become normalized. Hydration matters more than people realize as well. Mild dehydration alone can worsen focus, memory, emotional regulation, headaches, dizziness, anxiety-like symptoms, and irritability. Many teenagers and young adults are unintentionally dehydrated because they live on caffeine, soda, energy drinks, or forget to drink water altogether. A dehydrated nervous system often feels more reactive and less resilient. For someone with ADHD, even mild dehydration can worsen executive functioning and frustration tolerance. And finally, I want families to think about food through the lens of support rather than shame. The goal is not rigid food rules or making people fearful of eating. The goal is helping the nervous system have enough biological support to function. Better food choices do not solve ADHD, OCD, anxiety, or emotional struggles overnight, but they often make the nervous system more resilient, improve focus, stabilize mood, support hormones, reduce blood sugar crashes, improve sleep, support gut health, and help the brain tolerate stress more effectively. Sometimes the first intervention is not another lecture, punishment, or argument. Sometimes the first intervention is protein, hydration, movement, sunlight, and helping the body feel safe enough to regulate again. One of the things I have found working with children, teenagers, and young adults is that many genuinely do not understand the difference between simple carbohydrates, complex carbohydrates, processed foods, and how those foods affect the brain and body. When I ask a teenager what a carbohydrate is, they often say something like bread or sugar, but they usually have never been taught how carbohydrates influence energy, focus, emotional regulation, anxiety, motivation, or even intrusive thoughts. A carbohydrate is essentially one of the body's main fuel sources, but not all carbohydrates function the same way in the brain. Think of carbohydrates almost like different kinds of firewood. Some burn extremely fast, creating a quick burst of energy and then crashing, while others burn slowly and steadily, giving the brain more stable fuel throughout the day. Simple carbohydrates are carbohydrates that the body breaks down very quickly. Because they digest fast, they tend to raise blood sugar rapidly and then often lead to a crash afterward. That crash can look like irritability, anxiety, shakiness, poor focus, cravings, emotional reactivity, fatigue, or what many parents describe as, he suddenly fell apart, or she gets emotional out of nowhere. Examples of simple carbohydrates include candy, soda, sweetened coffee drinks, donuts, pastries, sugary cereals, white bread, white pasta, chips, crackers made with white flour, fruit snacks, Pop-Tarts, juice, sports drinks, cookies, muffins, frozen waffles with syrup, energy drinks, sweetened yogurt, candy bars, and many fast food items. A teenager may wake up, skip breakfast, grab an energy drink and a pastry, and wonder why by second period they feel anxious, distracted, irritable, or unable to focus. Their nervous system may have experienced a fast blood sugar spike followed by a rapid drop, and for someone with ADHD, OCD, or anxiety, that crash may feel especially intense. This becomes even more important when stimulant medication enters the picture because stimulant medications often suppress appetite. A teenager with ADHD may eat very little during the day, survive on processed snack foods, consume caffeine, and then emotionally crash in the afternoon. Parents often interpret this as moodiness or disrespect, when biologically, the brain may be underfueled. Imagine asking someone to regulate emotions, tolerate frustration, sit in class, manage impulses, and organize tasks while their brain is essentially running low on fuel. We would not expect a car to drive well without gas, yet we sometimes expect children and young adults to emotionally regulate on little sleep, little protein, sugar, caffeine, and highly processed foods. Complex carbohydrates, on the other hand, digest much more slowly and tend to provide steadier energy for the brain and body. They usually contain more fiber, nutrients, and natural structure, meaning they help keep blood sugar more stable. Stable blood sugar often supports better emotional regulation, improved focus, more consistent energy, and fewer dramatic crashes. Examples of complex carbohydrates include sweet potatoes, oatmeal, quinoa, brown rice, beans, lentils, berries, apples, bananas paired with protein, vegetables, chickpeas, whole grain breads with fiber, steel-cut oats, squash, carrots, and whole fruits rather than juice. For example, an apple with peanut butter or a banana with Greek yogurt tends to support steadier energy better than a sugary granola bar alone because the protein and fat slow the blood sugar response. This is where I often explain it to young adults in a way they understand. I tell them to think of their brain like a phone battery. Simple carbohydrates are like charging your phone to 100% in 10 minutes, but then watching it die an hour later. Complex carbohydrates are like a slower, steadier charge that helps the battery last much longer. ADHD brains especially tend to struggle with emotional regulation and frustration tolerance when blood sugar swings wildly. Someone may suddenly feel angry, anxious, impulsive, or emotionally flooded and assume something is wrong with me, when part of what is happening may simply be physiology. We also have to talk about processed foods because many kids and young adults hear the term processed food and genuinely do not know what it means. A processed food is food that has been changed significantly from its original form, often through added sugar, preservatives, dyes, chemicals, flavor enhancers, artificial ingredients, or heavy manufacturing. Not all processing is bad. For example, frozen vegetables, plain yogurt, canned beans, or rolled oats are technically processed but still nutritionally supportive. The concern becomes ultra-processed foods, which are often engineered to be extremely rewarding to the brain and difficult to stop eating. Examples of ultra-processed foods include chips, candy, fast food, packaged pastries, sugary cereals, soda, highly processed frozen meals, fast food burgers and fries, instant noodles, packaged snack cakes, energy drinks, hot Cheetos, flavored chips, candy bars, microwave desserts, sugary protein bars, sweetened coffee beverages, processed lunch meats with heavy additives, and many convenience foods filled with preservatives and artificial dyes. These foods are often designed to be hyper-palatable, meaning they are engineered to taste so rewarding that the brain wants more. For someone with ADHD, this can become especially difficult because ADHD brains are often dopamine-seeking. Highly processed foods provide fast dopamine, quick pleasure, and immediate reward, but often leave the person hungrier, foggier, and more emotionally dysregulated later. I often explain it to teenagers this way. You are not weak if you crave junk food. Your brain likes quick fuel, but quick fuel usually does not last. What many neurodivergent individuals are truly craving is not just the sugar itself. They are often craving dopamine, energy, emotional comfort, stimulation, or regulation. A young adult may think, I just want chips. But biologically, their nervous system may actually be saying, I am tired, dysregulated, underfed, stressed, and looking for fast energy. When families begin helping their children understand the difference between foods that spike and crash the brain versus foods that stabilize and support the brain, many young people actually become more empowered rather than feeling shamed. The goal is not perfection. The goal is helping children, teens, and young adults understand how I eat affects how I feel. Because sometimes what looks like anxiety, irritability, poor focus, impulsivity, or emotional dysregulation is partially a nervous system trying to function on poor fuel. The core message is this: what looks like laziness may be depletion. What looks like someone being disrespectful, they may be dysregulated. What looks like lack of ambition may be dopamine, dysfunction, shame, low ferritin, poor sleep, THC use, low vitamin D, poor blood sugar regulation, or thyroid imbalance. What looks like anxiety may be blood sugar instability, B12 deficiency, hyperthyroid symptoms, low iron, gut dysfunction, or cortisol disruption. What looks like OCD getting worse may be the nervous system losing resilience because the body is inflamed, depleted, hormonally unstable, or sleep deprived. We do not use biology to excuse behavior. We use biology to design smarter interventions. This episode is for educational purposes and to provide support. It's not a substitute for professional mental health evaluation, diagnosis, or treatment. The more we learn to recognize the signs behind the behaviors, the more compassion and support we can offer to our kids, our partners, and ourselves. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this episode was helpful, I'd love it if you shared it with a fellow parent, caregiver, or educator who might need it too. You can also subscribe to stay up to date on future episodes and check out additional tools and resources at thepathtopeacetherapy.com. Follow me on Instagram at thepathtopeacetherapy. If you are in California, I offer virtual sessions if you are not in the Hermosa Beach and South Bay area. You can book online at the Path to Peace Therapy. And as always, take a deep breath. Give yourself some grace, and remember, peace is possible, and you don't have to do this alone.